I made my case for what I call a 40-year bear market. And it's not that it'll be just down for 40 years. What the case I made was that it would be that 40 years from now, you'll look up and you go, we haven't moved. If you inflation adjust, you were even. Inflation adjust, you were even 75 years later.
No, that's not what I want to hear as a millennial, though, because I'm in my prime earning years.
I made the case that over the next 40 years, we will either take a serious beating now and then climb our way out, but 40 years from now, present value will be fair value.
Dave Collum, professor of organic chemistry at Cornell and also a contributor to Zero Hedge. It is so great to finally get to talk to you, meet you, and bring you on the show for the first time. Thank you so much for joining me, Dave.
Well, this is great for me too. As I like to say, I like having conversations with smart, knowledgeable people, and if they want to record it, that's fine.
Well, you are way too kind. I just love to listen to my guests, and I think that's why the audience enjoys this program so much. Is we don't censor, we give you the space to talk. We have a diversity of opinions, and so I'm just thrilled to have you. And Dave, you are a professor of organic chemistry, yet you're someone who is a prolific writer and investor, like on all things around economics and the markets, and you've been doing this for decades. But I actually don't know your full story. So what is kind of this story from, doing chemistry, but also getting into investing and writing about economics? What was that story for you?
So see if I can do the whole thing quick.
Oh, no, you can take your time on this show, Dave.
Okay. So when I was a kid, my dad was a contractor, and we had great conversations at the dinner table, which I remember pretty well. And I can remember things like one time we were talking about the Great Depression. I said, so let me see if I got this right. You could buy real estate during the Great Depression and get stinking rich. And he said, yeah, but no one had any money. And what that translated into for me was this realization that you have to have money when things go on sale, which means you have to be in cash at the top, which means you have to sell those things that have been so good to you. And so and that everyone agrees is a great investment right at the moment when it's about to become a truly wretched investment. And he would talk about, labor unions and bidding and how to run businesses and stuff like that. So I thought I was going to go to Wall Street at one point when I was young. And then I was more of a science guy, kind of. I was a mediocre student, not stupid. But, there was other things to do, sports, drugs, sex, rock and roll, that sort of thing. And so I can remember my GPAs back to first grade. Do not ask me why. And there were some high points, low points. But in high school, I went 3.1, 3.1, 3.4, 4.1. And the 4.1 was to prove that I had reserve in the tank. I ended up going to Cornell, and you go, how do you get to Cornell as a white male with a 3.1, 3.1, 3.4? And the answer is severalfold, but one of which is my grandfather was vice chancellor of the Board of Regents of New York, which is the ag school, and he was president of the National Alumni Association. So that kind of gets you through the front door. And then majored in genetics, was going to go to med school. Last minute, Christmas break, I made the decision to switch to organic chemistry. I'd taken some electives and used them, and I really liked it. So I went off to Columbia. So I was Cornell's B team, right? I mean, I worked my ass off. I worked my ass off, but I wasn't a seasoned student. And so I ended up graduating from Cornell with a 3.4, although it was, again, nicely sloped. And I went to Columbia, which was the best organic chemistry division in the world. So it was really a stupendous opportunity. And I worked for a young guy who I recognized was a talent of a different level. And it turned out to be correct. He was a sort of a once every 20-year type organic chemist. So it turns out I busted Columbia's PhD record, I think, and got my PhD in 2.5 years. Yeah, that was pretty good for a second stringer. Went back to Cornell as an assistant professor. So Cornell actually asked me to interview at the end of my second year of grad school. Right, that was just surreal. I got dogs running behind me now, and And then I applied for 12 jobs, got 14 interviews. I mean, there was really momentum. I was the NVIDIA of my era. And so I went to Cornell, and then I was trained as a synthetic organic chemist. I decided I was going to switch to what's called physical organic, which is the former is how you make things, the latter is how things work. And I didn't have any calculus. I didn't have any math background, but I needed it. So I somehow survived that. I still don't know math, but that's okay. Survived tenure. And then had a pretty decent career. I think if you talk to my peers, I went into an extremely complicated field because everyone said, well, you'll fail and this and that. And I said, oh, okay, now you've got my attention. This is going to be fun. And ended up, it worked out really well. And I loved the complexity of it. So I'm wrapping up my program now after 45 years of pretty much nonstop continuous funding. My funding record was good enough that that the dean presented it to the trustees as a case study in success, to give you an idea. And during that time, I coached 2 sports in college. As head coach at men's gymnastics, and I now weigh about 7,000 pounds. And I was a very low level sort of coach in Taekwondo. And I tried out for the golf team in college, and all sorts of weird. I played lacrosse in high school. It was just a lot of weird stuff. And so then around the mid '90s, I all of a sudden just sort of woke up and said, "Oh, look at this! I've acquired quite a bit of wealth. Maybe I should start paying attention." It was actually triggered by a guy who gave me some tips, and they were actually really good tips. The guy was a traveling salesman, and he'd have lunch with CEOs, and they'd tell him stuff. And so I had been pure bonds through the 80s, which was not as good as equities, but it was a great return. You couldn't fail to make money in the 1980s. There was almost nothing that failed to make money in the 80s. The 87 crash occurred, and I had no exposure whatsoever. In fact, the bonds did even better. And a colleague said, you should own some equities. And I sort of looked at him and said, he's right. And so I rolled over hard into equities, became a raging tech bull. I mean, I really believed I was in the cult. And then around, so I made 700% on WorldCom and got out. I made 700% on Dell. I made 400% on Warner Lambert. I had years right 100%. Now, it was so crazy that I actually also had some leverage. So it was 100% on assets at risk. And so I really was. It was a sign of the bubble if there ever was one. And then around July of 98, I had read enough about markets to say something's wrong here. There's something. The structures of these markets are not right. So I'd learned enough, and so I took half my equities and emptied the mutual funds into cash. And almost to the day we went into the Asian crisis, and then at the bottom, I'm thinking you're either half moron or half genius. I don't know which, but you should have taken the other half out. And I said, look, if we get back, I'm getting rid of the rest because it was still wrong. So it rallied back. So in mid '99, I was putting very close stops behind everything. And by mid '99, I was 100% out of equities. And again, I'd rolled out of all the things that had paid me so well to own. And then I was buying gold. And part of it was a Y2K concern, which I think was a legitimate risk, but didn't pan out. But what happens and what was risky are two different things. And so I went pretty heavily into gold. And I also, I could believe this, I shorted the market through David Tice's Prudent Bear Fund, who's got to be a pretty good friend, and Doug Nolan, who's got to be a pretty good friend. So I was net short the market going into the .com burst. And I Twice I shorted the market. Twice I got out with about a 30% gain on a short. That's pretty good.
That is really good on a short.
Yeah. And at the same time, I'll never do it again. It's shorting is for pros and idiots, and the Venn diagram of those two is probably big. So I was worried about inflation, and that never really materialized in a way at the magnitude I was worried about, even though we all know it was lurking there in a very serious way. And so I went in, started buying energy equities. At first, I tried to do commodities, and I actually talked to Jimmy Rogers' partner, a guy named Clyde Harrison, for about 2 hours about the Rogers Commodities Fund, and I decided I didn't like the structure of it. It creeped me out. I talked to one of the money makers, one of the market makers, and he didn't convince me. So I said, screw it. So I used Fidelity and just went into a bunch of energy funds, so about a half a dozen. And I rode the whole energy thing all the way up in the knots. So my best decade, and again, a lot of this is the blind squirrel finding the nut, right? I mean, this is the blind nut finding the squirrel. It just wasn't that savvy. I kept falling off the turnip truck at the right time. And so during the knots, when everyone else was getting crushed by two pretty serious bear markets, I compounded 13% per year. And so with one decade like that, the rest is easy, right? And so where'd I blow it? Well, I was cashed up like you wouldn't believe, and I started to buy at the bottom of 0809. But I was convinced there was another factor of two in there. And I think the quote goes to Einhorn. He claims it goes to him. He said, you know what a 90% correction is? It's an 80% correction that then cuts in half. And I thought we had another factor of two. If you look at valuations at the bottom of 0809, we just barely touched below historical fair value. And so we had a lot of damage left to be done. What nobody saw, no one on the entire planet, including no central banker even, saw coming was $30 trillion. And I don't think they had any idea they'd go that far. I know of no money manager who can say, look, here's where I wrote about how big this bailout's going to be. I think that's several decimal points above what people thought they would do. And so I missed the equity rage throughout the teens pretty much. And gold did okay. So by the way, gold over the last 25 years has kicked equities' asses. I mean, it really has been. It's about 2% above the total return on equities, to give you an idea. And there's no fees and stuff like that if you have physical. But I compounded like 4% a year through the teens till roughly to the present. Having a good year this year, that's for sure. So that's my story on that. Then somewhere I wrote I used to post on bear websites with some now very well-known people. There's about 200 of us who were just raging about, the AOL and how it's going to crash and burn, and when Steve Case, bailed, that was the top, and that sort of thing. There were Goldman guys at these websites. There were Chris Martinson was there, Adam Taggart was there, Noland, of course, all these guys, and I wrote something to a guy named Bob Moriarty. I don't know how much you really pay attention to the gold space, but
we have some guests on, and our audience loves gold, so they'll probably be familiar with his name.
Oh, okay. So he's the old man of gold. He's a crotchety bastard. He's funny because when I chat with him, he's always insulting me. He's always going, "Oh, you whiny bitch," He's just unbelievably cantankerous, which is terms of endearment. And he at one point said I was the greatest investor he's ever known, and I'm going, "You're so full of shit, Bob." So in any case, I wrote something for him, and he published it. That was my first blog ever. And he did a couple others. I posted a couple of blogs. You're not going to believe this. I wrote a blog about earning by carrying golf bags when I was 13. I sent a letter to an obscure Harvard economist who I was chatting with late at night. That I sent her an email and I said, look, when I was 13 years old, I caddied and I got paid $10 for 4 hours. I said, I happen to remember buying an extra large pizza from one of those, Italian guys spinning the pizza place, not Domino's, not that crap. And it cost $2. So I was being paid 1.25 pizzas per hour. And I realized that that's just an unbelievable sum of money for a 13-year-old to be making. Because that was modern day dollars, that would be probably $25. And she posts on her website, and we would chat late at night by email, just swapping. That turned out to be Elizabeth Warren.
Whoa.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. That was really funny.
Y'all go way back then.
Well, so I didn't. She wasn't famous back then. She was known.
What made you what was it that made you want to email Elizabeth Warren, then a Harvard professor?
Well, she wrote about. She had a presence, and she was a progressive, and she was. And I'm a Reagan Republican, so that in itself. But progressives can come from the right or left. But she seemed to care about the little guy, and I could see the little guy getting crushed, and so there was a common ground there. And we just used to swap emails. And she got put in charge of the TARP Oversight Committee. And I emailed her. I said, you just threw the shortest straw in history. And she said, yeah, this is already getting kind of tough. And I told her I had a friend at the Fed who used to be the CEO of Morgan Stanley Bank, the banking subsidiary. I said, if you need an ally, he might be a decent guy. I wasn't sure. And so I introduced her to him, and there was this strange three-way email between the head of the TARP Oversight Committee, Dave, right, second string Dave, and the CEO of Morgan Stanley Bank. so I'm kind of going down memory road a little bit, but you asked for it.
No, I love it. And I feel like there's a lot of lessons in that answer as well. And it kind of makes me, man, I wish I were one of your students because I'm sure you have great stories. I heard there was a story where you told your students that right before the financial crisis, maybe it was a couple years, or you were like the banking system was going to fail, right?
March of 2007.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I had been watching the market ABX index and reading a blog by a woman named Tanta, whose actual name was Doris Dungy, which we found out only after she died. And she was talking about the chaos in the credit markets, and you could see it in the market ABX index, which was basically a derivative index, and it was starting to tank, and it wasn't supposed to tank. And there was some of us watching this going, there's something breaking inside the credit system. And no one was talking about it in the mainstream press. And the central bankers were all saying, the housing market never goes down in pockets, yes, but not nationally. And I'll tell you the one thing I learned from chemistry was I studied this complicated field. Not only was it complicated, I had people saying you'll never figure it out. We did. And I had people saying, you'll never get funded, and we did. But I found out that almost everything I'd learned was wrong. And you dig into it and you go, wait a minute, that guy won the Nobel Prize for that, and that's not even correct, right? That's sort of level sometimes. And so I realized the experts who are trying to get it right can get it wrong badly. And so I developed through the chemistry program a skill to be able to sort of look a dozen experts in the eye and say, you're all full of shit. That was a gift. And I thrive under those conditions. So that famous experiment where they have about 10 guys in a room and one of them's the sucker. And they put up a picture of lines and they say which one's the longest. There's clearly one that's longer than the other three. And they say which one's the longest. And the 9 guys say this one is it. And they give the wrong answer. And the 10th guy in the experiment, something like 75% of the time, would go along with them. He could not break from the fact that the tribe had all given the wrong answer, and so he gave the wrong answer. I am the guy who'd say, "You're all out of your fucking minds. You're completely out of your minds," and there's no way that would have gotten by me. So,
imagine what that says about society, though, like that kind of
well, it's
experiment.
human nature. We're tribal,
Yeah.
right? That's what it says. It says we're very tribal,
Yeah.
which is why, if you watch what's going on in the world today, why everything's so fractured, because we're so tribal. And so in any case, I've written, last year I made my case for what I call a 40-year bear market. And it's not that it'll be just down for 40 years. What the case I made was that it would be that 40 years from now, you'll look up and you go, we haven't moved. And I don't know when. It could be 30 years from now we haven't moved. It could be, I don't know. But and it turns out that's happened before, and people don't even know it. If you own the 29 high, and you look at capital gains, if you inflation adjust, you were even. Inflation adjust, you were even 75 years later.
No, that's not what I want to hear as a millennial, though, because I'm like, I'm in my prime earning years. It's like,
no, 29, 30. That one is 50 years later, 50, 81. So that's 30, 50. Yeah, that one, 50 years later, you were even. Because from peak to trough, it takes decades. And so at some point we will be dirt cheap. At some point in the future, we will be dirt cheap. And when that day comes, and people say, well, we'll never get that cheap again. I go, what are you talking about? Show me an asset market that was overvalued that didn't eventually regress to and through the mean, period. There's none. There's not a documented case of that. So we will. And I made the case that over the next 40 years, we will either take a serious beating now and then climb our way out. But 40 years from now, the present value will be fair value.
Dave, I usually always start with the big picture macro view for my guest. And so let's go there. I want to get your macro view, the framework in which you are looking at the world today. And just as a reminder, you can take all the time you need to set the table when it comes to that macro picture.
Okay, so as I kind of led up to this, my conventional macro view is that if you look at all the non-headline creating indicators, so something like new jobs is a headline indicator, and it's an election year, and so they're going to fake those numbers like crazy, and they do. But if you look at things like minor indicators that are every bit as important, they're just, say, some New York State, you name it. I've got hundreds of them that I watch. They are all rolling over. So I think we're about to start a serious downturn. The people who think the Fed is going to save the day, I think, are missing several important points. One is that I think Powell is probably every bit as worried about Powell. Everyone says, well, he's worried about the markets. I don't think so. I think Powell must know that he's got to bleed air out of the markets. In fact, I think one of his major concerns now ought to be the fact that we have a market of one stock at this point, NVIDIA, and so the Mag 7 has become the Mag 1, and it's just gotten insane. It looks more insane than the dot-com bubble to me, because the dot-com bubble, we were entering what was clearly a new era, right? There was just everything had really changed. And so the idea that you could join the tech cult and be a true believer, which is an Eric Hoffer book, is understandable. This one, there's nothing. There's no meat on the bones. I think AI is I'm not a doomer in the sense that it's I don't think it's going to destroy humanity in sort of a science fiction like way, but I think it could be a royal pain in the ass. For example, do you need to see yet another piece of AI art? And the answer is no, right? There's no creativity to it. So if AI starts showing up everywhere, then pretty soon you're going to be reading stuff you're not going to know where it came from. It's going to be scraping information from other AIs, and it's just going to become this gigantic garble. And so the internet will come even less tractable than it has become now. So I don't see any reason for super optimism that AI is going to change the world in a positive way. It will. There are advantages to it. There are things it can do, but it's just not as clear to me. So I think we're heading into a serious downturn. I think the everything bubble, as I think Jesse Felder named it, is hit everything at this point. And when it goes, I don't think Powell's going to feel the need to save it right away. Now, the second thing is I think he's worried about legacy. So Powell's an aging man, and the question is, does he want to save the markets at the cost of great inflation, and then go down in history as one of the biggest assholes in the Federal Reserve? And the answer is no. I think he's going to want to join Paul Volcker and on Mount Rushmore and be considered one of the great central bankers who maybe did the right thing. And so I think for several years now I've said that the pundits were underestimating Powell's resolve. He said he's going to cause pain. He told us 3 times. We have had no pain yet. We have none, but besides inflation, and his job is to prevent that pain. I really do think we're so far overvalued that the markets really have to tank, and a crash doesn't do it because dip buyers show up on crashes. I think the way you correct markets, and I got in an argument with a prominent guy. He said a correction is anything that goes against trend. I said no. Maybe that's your definition. Maybe that's the market's definition. But the word correction is implicit in it that it fixed something. So if you tank down 20% and then bounce back a year later, you fix nothing, absolutely nothing. And so a real correction fixes the price, which I think is, if you let 1880 to 1990 set historic fair value, so I say the average of valuations during that period, because they launched from the surface of the earth around mid-90s, never to look back. We're about 150% over fair value by my metric. And so then if you correct 60, 70%, there's going to be a lot of pain. It's not going to be trivial pain. It's going to be boomers who thought they were okay, who are not. And the winners would actually be the young guys who can finally buy assets cheaply and put them away for your age bracket, you young punks. I think the boomer demographic is in for a rude awakening. The fact that the boomers are at the end of their demographic bulge is a bad sign. The fact that China is no longer going to sell us cheap goods using slave wages, the fact that Russia is not going to be supplying us with natural resources at the level that they were, maybe. The fact that, here's a stat for you. This is a stunning stat. So valuation is a metric that's basically the price of the market divided by something it should track, which means it should go up and down, but it shouldn't trend. So if it's price earnings, price revenue, price book, you name it, I follow about 25 of those. The valuations from 1981 to the present compounded 3% a year. What happens when that flips to a negative 3%? And people say, oh, that never happened. It will happen because expensive markets always regress to and through the mean. There will never be a period in history where the expensive market goes up there and never comes down again. So that's that view. Now, my big scary view is that the politics of the country are starting to look sketchy enough that I could imagine the American experiment being over. I think we could be heading for an authoritarianism, which in some sense was brought on by the internet. For years, I've been saying the internet was the world's democracy's greatest hope and worst enemy.
Got it. Okay, so let's go back to, you have a thesis around a 40-year bear market. Mm-hmm. I want you to elaborate a bit more, because as I was also listening to you, you were bringing up demographics and possibly some opportunities for younger folks. Because I think when I heard you earlier, I was like, no, this sounds like a terrible idea for someone like my generation that wants to build wealth in our prime earning years. Can we just hear more of your thesis on this 40-year bear market and maybe a bit of the demographics?
Well, let's first of all start with the young versus the old part. I think you can assume that you make half of the gains you make in roughly 20 of those 40 years typically, right? The real money is made, like for example, I mentioned the knots where I made 13% compounded. You don't need too many of those decades to have a net win. And again, if you were in the markets from 67 to 81, you got crushed. You lost 75%. Inflation corrected. If you were in the Nikkei, you're inflation adjusted, you're still not back to even, but nominally, you're finally back to even after 35 years. If you invested in the Nikkei, starting in 1989, you're some 22-year-old graduate of Tokyo University, whatever, and you start investing, you start averaging 1,000 a month, whatever, you broke even after 20 years. So let's say you make half your money in half the time. As a youngster, you want that to be the second half because you want to save for the bad years and really soberly say, holy cow, I've got to save and save and save. And then from age 40 to 60, rock and roll. Because you don't want to have 15% of your returns while you've got $2,000 in your retirement account. So let's there. So now the tailwinds again. In 1981, the interest rates were 16% ish. Over the next 40 years, they went down to zero. If you read Buffett's 99 article, he said, you want to know the difference between a bear and a bull market? It's not about GDP. He said from 67 to 81, the GDP grew faster than from 81 to 99. And it was one was a bear and one was a bull. It makes no sense based on GDP. He says it's all interest rates. He said if the interest rates are in a secular way going up, you're going to lose. If they're in a secular way going down, you're going to win, period. We went from 16 to zero over 40 years in this unbelievably linear way, as though they knew they could squeeze about 40 years worth of an interest rate cycle. Now, it seems pretty clear to me that first and foremost, when rates get to zero, there's nowhere else to go now but up. Now, the pundits on TV who are still in cubicles in their mid-20s and go on TV occasionally will say, well, low rates are bullish. No, they're not. Dropping rates are bullish. Low rates are the end. It's over. You've squeezed the juice out of that lemon. And so once we got to zero, the credit cycle had to end. And, credit cycles are very long wavelength cycles. And so we're probably going to drift our way up for the next 40 years, wild guess, right? Who knows? But I think this credit cycle has finally turned, and I think it will turn against the central banks such that they no longer can flip some switch and make it go back down, because they're going to hit inflation hard if they do that. And so I think they're boxed in by real inflation now, the kind that's inescapable. The Chinese came out of the dark ages. They were selling their labor for 25 cents an hour. I don't know what it was, but we lived off unbelievably cheap Chinese goods for those 40 years, which kept inflation in check. So the deflation the disinflation was because of China. 1 billion people willing to work for pennies on the dollar to provide us goods and services and accept U.S. treasuries in return. Right? This is a crazy world, and it's over. So now we've pissed off the Russians. The Russians, when the Soviet Union collapsed. If you want to watch a great interview, by the way, check out Jeff Sachs, Tucker Carlson's interview. Jeff calls it spectacularly, and the bottom line is that back in, I think it was Brzezinski, back in 97 said that our worst nightmare would be if Russia, China, and Iran formed an alliance. It's looking pretty good right now. And the BRICS is no longer, 4 countries. It's somewhere between 20 and 40 countries. And people say, well, the BRICS currency is not worth it, blah, blah, blah. You make all these currency arguments. I don't care about currency arguments. What I care about is you got 20 to 40 really important countries saying, we're no longer with the United States. They are cutting off their alliances with us. That's what BRICS is. They don't need a currency. They can go to gold if they have to. They can go to all sorts of things if they have to. But they're saying, we are going with the other guys. We're going with Russia. We're going with China. We're going with India. There's the Arab oil countries are doing this. They're all over the world. They're abandoning us. And it's because those morons in charge of foreign policy weaponize the dollar. And Putin called it to a T when he said, look, you guys want to be the reserve currency, yet you confiscate assets? So the minute that happened, everyone in the world said, oh, piss off the United States, you'll lose everything. Therefore, we better get away from the United States. We better get away from the dollar because it's risky, because we will hurt you if we don't like you. And that's just incredibly stupid. I wrote about the Ukrainian war. 100% NATO's fault. If you can't fathom why I say that, you are not even on the first rung of the ladder. If you've paid attention to this, we might be able to have a debate and disagree about certain aspects of the NATO war. But to me, Putin played the best hand he could play. NATO forced the Ukrainian war. This will turn out to be a most colossal of failures, because now let's start out with 500,000 dead Ukrainians. So we whined and bitched about when Khashoggi got killed in the Saudi embassy. I called him ODK, one dead Khashoggi. Who cares? He's over in the Saudi embassy, he gets killed. Who cares? Guys die over there all the time. We killed 4.5 million people over in the Middle East. We are thugs. And now what we're discovering, and this is where it gets really interesting, is wonky geopolitical types are saying the U.S.'s military is not equipped for the modern era now. And so we can't even be effective thugs. And so this is all just a real horror story to me, that what we've done to ourselves here. And the election. Okay, was the election rigged in 2020? I mean, the elections are always rigged at some level, right? You go back and, Kennedy's father bought off Chicago, and, they're always rigged around the edges. But 2020, the question is, was it rigged in a truly, truly, truly consequential way? And I know that there's people who think they can make the argument it wasn't. I personally think it was unambiguously rigged. And my logic is twofold. One is I think the data supports it. It's not spectacular, because every time it went to court, the judge threw it out every single time. They didn't adjudicate it and say no, they threw it out. No case was taken to the finish. The second thing is, what we all know is that both Democrats and Republicans did not want Trump in the White House. Both parties did not want Trump in the White House. So the Republicans pretended to care. But you would be hard-pressed to find someone inside the Beltway who would take a bullet for Trump at this point. I mean, they wanted him out. And so then the Russia collusion, everything imaginable they did to him to try to make sure he didn't end up back in the White House. Yet someone is going to try to make the case to us that they forgot to rig the election? No, not a chance in hell. Not a snowball. I went to bed at 1:30 in the morning. Trump was going to win. I woke up at 7 in the morning. He had lost. How is that possible? And so the bottom line is, we don't trust the elections. Now, I could be wrong. I really could be wrong. It could be it was a fair and honest election. I would be flabbergasted if I turned out to be wrong, but I could be wrong. But half the country believes this. And if half the country believes it's not a fair election, we got a problem. And the way you'd solve it is by having a fair, unambiguously fair election. The 2022 election didn't do a very good job at that. There was a lot of crap going down during that, but most people didn't pay attention, because who cares about Arizona and things like that. But if this election looks as cheesy and corrupt as the other one, then it's game over for us, in my opinion. And then people talk about a civil war, but I don't know what a civil war looks like. What I do know is that after Trump got convicted of bizarrely irrelevant charges that got elevated to felonies because it was said to rig the election. So some chick he supposedly banged. Well, first of all, is anyone shocked, right? You got to figure Trump has banged a few chicks through the years. Second of all, to pay off a chick to shut her mouth because you're running for president is not illegal. There's nothing illegal about that. My brother's an accountant. He's been trying to figure out what supposedly was the illegal move that they did on the accounting of that payment. He can't figure it out. But they said it was to rig the election. I go, oh, no politician's ever spent money to make themselves look better. No one's ever, and you don't even know if Trump actually did anything wrong. What you know is he paid her, what, $130,000 to shut up because he's busy running for president. And that's legal. That's legal. He broke no law, best I can tell. It's this arcane stuff. And then, of course, they passed a new law that for this case, the statute of limitations doesn't apply. How is that possible? And the answer is it's possible because I watched Donald Trump Jr., who I must say I've paid no attention to. He is a very smart guy. He got the brains in that family, I think. And he told the whole story. Now, it's through the Trump lens, so it's biased, but it's also from a guy who's right at ground zero. So we're getting the Trump view from ground zero. And he said the big mistake we all made is that we assumed that there was some point that some line they wouldn't cross. And he says, that's the fool's assumption. He said, there is no line they won't cross. Tucker Carlson came out and said, look, here's the pattern. They did A, B, C, D, and E. He said, the next move is to assassinate him. He said, oh, they'd never do that. Well, we'll find out, maybe. So this is the crazy world. And I could be wrong in all of this, but I'm not alone. And I would say it wasn't many years ago when anyone who talked like this would be considered a crazy person. And by half the country, we still are considered crazy people, but the other half of the country thinks we're totally spot on. And that's the problem. We don't trust the system at all anymore.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because I'm hearing, like, in the macro view, two big themes, like entering this 40-year bear market and this notion that the American experiment could be over. So I guess my question for you, Dave, is how are you prepared, or how do you prepare yourself for such a scenario? Portfolio construction. Just walk me through, like, how are you prepared for something like this to play out?
Well, first of all, I was once told by a guy who said, whatever you do, don't do anything that requires a disaster for you to be okay. So there's guys who, sold their houses and, learned how to can butter and things like that, thinking that, the end is near. So you hedge against risk, but you can't it's very hard to hedge against tail risk unless you're Nassim Taleb or someone, and then you know how to do it, but I don't know how to do it. And there's things like I have a prepper gene in me now, it turns out. So
are you a prepper?
I'm a minor prepper. So I believe that there's all sorts of ways the world could go bad on you for at least a brief period. So we could have an ice storm that knocks out power for a month, right? I don't know if you're paying attention, but there's solar flare issues that could wipe out the grid. And the reason that they're becoming an issue is because it turns out that the magnetic poles are moving quickly now, and they protect the globe from solar flares. And so there's this very strange plot that says we could really be taken out. And the most doomish scenario is a total die-off, just a massive die-off. And the poles reverse about every 6,000 years, supposedly. And it's pretty rhythmic, and every other reversal apparently is a more serious problem but if the magnetic field flips, the magnetic field, if it flips, it turns out it no longer, I think they're cosmic rays, the cosmic rays that hit the Earth are no longer protected by the magnetic field. And so, and the last time something really bad happened was in 1859. It's called the Carrington event, and it fried the entire telegraph system, right? And the telegraph system in 1859 must have been quarter-inch copper tube, copper wire, right? This was not delicate microchip stuff. And it fried it. And literally, telegraph poles were lighting on fire and stuff. And and current was moving through the cables without the thing being turned on and stuff like that. That hits us now, you could be in trouble.
Let me ask you a couple follow-ons. Just going back to
the generic stuff. Go back up to
the generic stuff. Yeah, here we go. We'll go back to the investing. Okay, so
how am I defending myself? Okay, so I never answered that part.
Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, on the prepper side, I think if you have a house, you have space, and you have the resources, it is inexcusable not to have a handful of months worth of food somewhere in your house. Inexcusable. Because I'm not talking about, freeze dried, whatever. I'm talking about just calories. I'm talking about going to the store and buying a couple 100 pounds of rice, buy a couple of things of Morton salt, so that you cannot be gnawing your arm off 3 weeks after some grid went down or something. So that you should ask yourself, how do I survive a couple of months of pain? And the best way to do it is to be able to eat something, and possibly feed your neighbors. And rice is still, I don't know, $50 for 100 pounds, something like that. It's not expensive.
And also, clean drinking water is going to be really important.
I live on a lake.
There you go. Anything else? Gold. You mentioned gold. I know you like gold.
Well, I don't like the fact that I have to own it. I have quite a bit of gold. And I had a discussion with Luongo the other day. And there's a question of, let's say you have what you think is the insurance policy asset. So some people think it's Bitcoin, some think it's gold, some think it's real estate, whatever. Let's say you're in Weimar, Germany, or some place where the insurance policy asset was needed. What percentage do you need to sort of break even? So, for example, if you're in Weimar, Germany, and you put all your savings into gold, you became very wealthy. You could buy buildings for an ounce of gold. You had that liquidity to buy up unbelievable tracts of land and stuff. And so the question though is what percentage do you need to have to break even, so that at the end you just kind of covered yourself, right? It's like I have people say, "Oh, Dave, you should get just 1% Bitcoin." I go, "What good will that do me? What's 1% Bitcoin going to do for me?" And so the question is, how much? What do you need? I kind of come to about 20%. That if all hell breaks loose, that if you have 20% in and you happen to get the asset class correct, that ought to leave you relatively well off. And I'm not a hodler. I'm not a Bitcoin guy. I'm very sympathetic to the Bitcoin community. They all know me. They all want me to become a hodler. I think if I ever announced I bought Bitcoin, the internet would erupt. But there's two things they haven't done battle with yet. They haven't done battle with the state, capital S state. And I think they're going to. Now, if not, then I had dinner with a hedge fund manager, breakfast with a hedge fund manager about a week ago, and he said, it's just a collectible. He says, nothing more, nothing less. It's a collectible. It'd be like buying Picassos to protect your wealth or something. I don't share that view either. But I think they're going to do battle with the state. And the second thing the hodlers have not survived yet is an illiquid drawdown like 0809. So we don't know what Bitcoin will do if we end up in a real credit crunch. And I'll be watching it very, very carefully under those circumstances. And I own some energy stocks.
Yeah, you mentioned you were having a good year this year.
Yeah. I'm up about 30%. I mean, it's a good year.
Okay, so energy, gold, what else?
2-year treasuries. So short end of the yield curve. There's some stuff I don't control, which is done fine, but there's some stuff that's tucked in an account that I don't really have control over. But it's kind of an old man's portfolio, the usual 40, 60, thing, and hopefully I didn't even pay attention to it. It came from my dad. And I own a house that's 3 times more than I need. I didn't think I cared where I lived. And then my wife wanted to live on the lake, and I said, okay. And I talked to a realtor, and she said, I got a house for you. And it turns out we hang off a 100-foot cliff looking west over Cuba Lake, and it's utopia. And it is basically going long real estate, because if you own 3 times more than you need, then that's no longer just a dwelling, right? And you have to consider that an asset. And I haven't had any debt since in '99 when I was bearish, and I cleared everything out. I still had a little bit left on a 9% mortgage, and so I paid that off to get 9% return. But now it's just I could get crushed too. Gold can go down in downturns. Everything. It's very hard. It's very hard. There will be people who do well. You won't know if it's because of genius or because they woke up on third base, thought they had a triple, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let me ask you this question. Is this going to be your last year at Cornell? Is that what I heard earlier? No. Okay. I thought I heard you say in your final year.
I'm wrapping up my research program.
Oh, your research program. Okay. So you're okay. Because, just talking to you, listening to you, you are not what you would typically think of when you think of like an Ivy League professor and their viewpoints.
You figure. Really?
Okay. So, you said like when you were, sharing some of your ideas that, some people are going to think, wow, this guy's totally crazy. They're going to completely change their worldview, turn it upside down. And I just want to kind of get your thoughts on maybe it's like around, free speech. Can you talk about like campuses, campus culture, your ability to express yourself and, like how are you treated by colleagues, students, those sorts of things. Just kind of take us inside that world as well and being able to, have different views.
Well, I think being Trump tolerant is the way I put it. I'm not a raging Trump fan, but I'm becoming one out of principle. But I'm Trump tolerant. I got past his idiosyncrasies and said the one issue for that was that I said he won't get us in foreign wars. And I had become very anti-war. And my colleagues can't fathom how I could vote for Trump, and I can't fathom how they'd vote for Biden. So there's a rift there. Cornell is Cornell's got a bad rap. I don't know how. We're actually pretty good with free speech here, in my opinion. The current acting president is a friend of mine, and he I've known him since the day he got here as just a professor in the vet school, and he's very good. He's spectacular, actually. His name is Mike Kotlikoff, and FinTwit would potentially recognize that name. His brother is Larry Kotlikoff, the guy who went through all the math of the unfunded liabilities, which add up to something like $2 million per household that we don't know how we're going to pay for. So one day Larry said to me, he said, you by chance know my brother, Mike? And I said, oh yeah, we spent Sunday together. And so it's a small world. I got canceled in 2020. It was kind of a wretched experience, but it was survivable.
Yeah, can you share that? What happened in 2020? And I haven't had anybody on who has been canceled. Like, take us in. Like, what is that like when you are canceled? If you don't mind.
Well, it actually goes way back because I was asked by the dean of faculty to help fight a grad student unionization by the UAW probably 20 years ago. I can't remember, so long ago. And I helped, but the union just lost on the principles. It was a definitive victory for the anti-union team. I'm not totally anti-union. In fact, I think they're coming back, and one could argue they're needed now. I think the worker probably needs a little help here. Then in around, I got to remember, 2017 maybe, they came back as the American Federation of Teachers, and the provost called me, the acting president now, and by phone call. Nothing was done by email. We knew better than Hillary. Don't use email. He called and said, I need you to organize a group to oppose the American Federation of Teachers. Randy Weingarten, that son of a bitch's organization. And so I organized a group, but the union played it brilliantly, and they refused to engage. And they had this army of workers, these worker bees who were traveling the campus getting votes. And I was the only faculty member fighting the union. I was the only one. And I was sending emails I sent a couple of emails across the campus, and it was having no effect. And then one day, a union idiot posted one of my emails that I sent to faculty saying, you got to get the students out to vote on social media. And the shit hit the fan. And the Daily Sun, Cornell Daily Sun, wanted to interview me, and I don't like doing interviews. I'll do podcasts, but I don't like interviews because I don't want them parsing what I say. So you and I are chatting, and whatever I say is in context. They can take it out of context in an interview. So I don't like doing interviews. Written interviews are fine. And I had to call an audible, so I did it. And at the end, it was clear they were going to do a hit piece on me. And at the very end, I said, I'm not done. And she says, well, what else do you want to say? I said, no, that's a quotable quote. I'm not done. And she took the bait. So the fine thing is, Collum says, I'm not done, right? So I threw down the gauntlet. And then the Cornell Review, which was started by Ann Coulter, did an interview of me favorably, and it was an email interview, and we were able to orchestrate getting the ideas out. And instead of getting 50 clicks like you'd expect, they got 2,000, 2,500. And we won by 60 votes. So then the union organizers, about a week later, smeared the shit out of me in the Daily Sun. And it felt bad, but they didn't do any, it was superficial damage. But then what happened is, during the period in which cancel culture had picked up. Cancel culture has been around for quite a while. People don't know this. I came to the rescue of a friend of mine in San Diego years ago who was getting canceled by the blogs. But in any event, around 2020, remember when the old guy got knocked over in Buffalo?
Yes.
Yeah. So Chris Irons of QTR fame posted that, said, oh, this is just awful. And I watched the video and I said, Chris, we can talk about it on Saturday. We're doing a podcast. I said, we can talk about it on Saturday, but I don't see it that way. He was in a riot zone. He was poking the riot police with something. Why was he there? And then I said, it looks pretty self-inflicted to me. Within 30 minutes, a complete shitstorm had hit. And it was so fast and furious that I know it wasn't grassroots. It was not grassroots. Within a half an hour, a free speech group, a national free speech group, reached out to me and said, we see you're having trouble. If you need our help, give us a yell. Right?
Was that Fire?
Fire. That was Fire. Mm-hmm. Very good. Yeah. Very good.
Yeah, we had the president of Fire on probably one of my at least first 10 episodes. Yeah.
Was that Height?
Lukianoff. Yeah.
Lukianoff and Ricky Schlott now is up to her ass. Mm-hmm. You should have her on if you haven't had her on yet.
I haven't had her on yet.
So by the morning, email boxes all across the campus have been filled up with Fire column emails and stuff like that. So Cornell was on a kind of a war footing. The Daily Sun was doing daily pieces on what a piece of shit I was. I started calling it the Daily Column and was posting them on Twitter, but I had to shut down my Twitter feed because it was getting really ugly. And the trigger, and I've never been able to figure out how they did it, but the trigger was a Hollywood elite comedian or something with something like 2.5 million followers, and he tagged me. And then a half an hour later, deleted the tweet, but the fight was on at that point. So I'm sitting during lockdown on my deck, trying to figure out if it being locked down is good news or bad news. And the problem was I didn't know if I knew that lockdown was good news with respect to Cornell kids acting pissed off at me. But I was worried Antifa was going to show up. So I slept with loaded guns. I put steak knives in every room in case I got cornered. And I was emotionally ready to blow some bastard's head off. I mean, it was just, I was not going to the light alone. And we were sheltered with my son, his main squeeze, and my wife, and countless dogs and stuff like that. So, and I had several trustees on my corner, and I was getting phone calls from them, and we were having chats. And they were very good, and they were saying Cornell should just shut up and say nothing. And they both went to the president's office independently and said, don't do anything. And then the president ended up denouncing me in a letter that really ended it. And I forgave her. It was signed by, ironically, the president, the provost, who's my friend, a couple other people, the chief of police, who I was defending the cops, right? But they wanted the chief of police to be there because they didn't want the students to turn against the Cornell cops. And I was on a Zoom call with that guy later, and I said, and as you know, I support the police. So in any case, but it was ugly. It was a very lonely experience. And I didn't know what was going to happen. What I did know was I had a colleague who tried to get me to resign. And I got mad at him, and I said, I am not quitting, period. He wanted to clean up the mess by me resigning. I said, I am not quitting. And he is supposed to be a friend, but I've never forgiven him for that.
I suppose you realize in those moments, like, who your real friends are? Well,
I got emails from some colleagues. The colleagues who were most creeped out were Chinese colleagues. Why? Cultural revolution. The Cultural Revolution was coming back to haunt them. And so in any event, so I survived it. It turns out the guy who got knocked over was a grifter of a higher order. He was scanning their belts with what's called a skimmer. And there's videotapes. I have video of him telling people he was going to go pick a fight with the cops and get punched up by the cops on purpose. And they were saying, why would you do this? Why would you do that? And then I've got a picture of him. First of all, I think he faked the blood coming out of his ears. It squirted out. I think he faked that. And then I got a picture of him laying on the gurney behind the ambulance, talking on his cell phone. But the press is saying, oh, he's in a coma. We can't find him. CNN tried to locate him. His lawyers said this and that. The whole thing was a grift. He made a ton of money. Someone, while he was supposedly in a coma, was cleaning up his Twitter feed that had "fuck the police" shit all over it. So the whole thing. So Cornell was wrong at two levels. This is the only time I've ever criticized Cornell. They were wrong on the facts. And they were wrong on saying that what I said does not represent Cornell's values, and I'll tell you why. Because Cornell doesn't have values. If they do, they are constitutional level foundational principles, like free speech. Okay? Cornell's values have nothing to do with me thinking the cop that he shouldn't have been poking the cops. Because Cornell's heterogeneous. The president can't speak of Cornell's values. She can speak of her values with the gravitas of the presidency if she wants. But she can't speak for me. She can't speak for my colleagues. She can't say this is Cornell's values. And she did. She's done it twice. And when she did the second time was the guy who stood up and said he was exhilarated by the Hamas attack on Israel. Now, that was pretty stupid. Right? That was really a pretty dumb thing to say. But she said it again. And then she said, this is only the second time I've denounced this, what was said by a Cornell faculty member. I'm going, yeah, you pig fucker. I was the first. She just resigned. What I'll tell you is there's a backstory to why she resigned. And it's dark. And I know it.
Mm-hmm. As we wrap up this conversation, as you pointed out, it's a dark view that you have of like the macro picture. But I want to kind of have you at least leave us with something maybe that you are optimistic on? Are you hopeful for the future? Like, is there something that, brings you hope?
Well, I think it's possible that we're not defeatable. It is possible. Forget the Hansen book that says they all thought they were not defeatable either. But I think we have to speak up. I went to a seminar of God Sod, and he said you have to speak up. And I actually just by chance I ran across a talk I gave in Vegas, and I talked about college politics. And in it, this was last night actually, I ran across it. I'm going to listen to that. That was fun. And I said you have to speak up. And this is pre-cancellation. I said you have to speak up, and you have to support people. Before I got canceled, people had been canceled, and I would reach out to them and say, we have your back. There are people who have your back. It was just an instinct of mine saying, reach out to them. The guy in North Carolina who got canceled, I reached out to him. He killed himself. The blood is on the hands of these nitwit lefties who think that just because they're a little person they can punch up, that they don't realize that they're a mob. And that's not punching up anymore. And so speak out against it. And then some student raised their hand and said, well, I'm a 6-year grad student. I can't speak up because of this. And Saad said, he says, when I came to campus, I have to bring security with me. My wife walks 5 feet behind me, watching for people who might be lurking, waiting to do something. He said, if I can speak up, you can speak up. So we have to speak up. We have to fight this. Now, what horrifies me is that I might be playing a role that's intended. I might be the guy I might be a trucker. I might be a January 6th insurgent. And that they want this. Like, for example, there's going to be poll watchers in this election. There's going to be more than normal, right? You watch. This will happen. There will be poll watchers who get violent as hell, and it's going to be hung on the Trump guys. Violence is going to show up at the polls, and they're going to say it's the Trump guys. And you ever seen the Patriot Front guys? These are these guys who look like feds. They march around, and they're all well-dressed. They're all buff and no pot bellies and no tattoos and no anything. And they say that they're these right-wing supremacists. They're not. There's no chance, right? You show me a bunch of right-wing supremacists, I'll show you a bunch of guys with tattoos and beer guts and stuff like that. These are not. These are feds. Search Patriot Front on YouTube, listeners, and watch them. The whole thing is a scam. Now, I personally would round them up and try them for treason. Because it is treason by my definition. Morally, it's treason. It might not be the legal definition. I don't know. But then I'm playing into the game. I am the Washington General playing the Harlem Globetrotters at that point. And but we might win. It might just go away. I've heard high school kids are sick and tired of the woke shit. That they're actually critical of the woke shit, saying, oh, you and your purple hair and your 17 genders and whatever, you think you're cool. You're all doing it. Y'all look stupid. I'm going to write about gender this year. I was going to write last year, ran out of time. I'm going to attack it from two perspectives. I don't care if you're transgender. It doesn't matter to me. I feel sorry for you. It's not if you're a teenager and you're transgender, life sucks. I mean, it's hard. It's hard enough being a teenager. It's hard enough being the captain of the cheerleader, the captain of the football team. You still have self-doubts. But being transgender is a nightmare. But here's where I draw the line. One is you don't do medical interventions on kids. Period. They're not ready to commit themselves to being sterile. They commit themselves in getting double mastectomies, getting fake vaginas and fake penises as teenagers. And second, get them out of sports. Get them out of the female sports. Women fought for the right to have sports. They finally have it. And now Now the guys are showing back up and screwing it all up. And this is not the right wing doing this. I did a poll on Twitter and said, no waffling, no anything. Do you or do you not support transgenders competing in women's sports? Yes or no? 5,000 answers. You know Twitter. It's a pretty good sample size. 97.6% said no. We have the answer on transgenders in sports. Society knows that it's stupid, knows it's insane, but we don't quite know how to stop it yet. But we will, and I'll tell you how we're going to do it. The women are going to have to say no. I know it's a burden, but the women are going to have to say, I'm not competing. I'm not doing it. Or they have to go out there and grab the guy by the nuts and hurt him. They have to do something. They have to take back the playing field for the women. And I will help you. I'll fight. I'll scream. I'll yell. But the women have to say, I am not competing. They have to go out on the field. They have to walk off the field and say, we are not competing against that dude out there. And if they don't do this, this crap's going to continue. And this is left-wing crap. Revolutions come from the left. They come from the right. Well, the one we're experiencing is coming from the left. And the next one may come from the right. Who knows? But these are not Trumpers who are doing this. These are neo-Marxists. Start reading James Lindsay. If you want to understand the world we live in today, stop reading about politics and start reading about authoritarianism. Read Hannah Arendt. Read Eric Hoffer. Read Mike Malice's book on how the Soviet Union consumed itself. If you read these books, read about brainwashing. If you read these books, you go, oh my God. If you read that, Edward Bernay's book on propaganda, you go, oh my God, that's what I'm seeing. We have to fight that. I think we can win it. I think we can win it because this is the dumbest shit I've ever seen.
Well, Dave, I have to say thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. I want to give you the final few minutes here. Let folks know where they can, find you on social, read more of your work, anything that you want to plug before I let you go here.
Well, if you want to see other podcasts, you just go to YouTube, and the ones that haven't been kicked off, you'll find them there. You can search them.
Do they get kicked off?
I've had a couple kicked off.
Well, we're probably going to get kicked off.
Well, then don't post it. If it's going to go to Rumble, I'll try to help you sell it at Rumble. But fear of getting kicked off YouTube is a real concern for you. For me, it's not. And so,
the whole channel gets kicked off, or the video gets kicked off.
I don't. Well. You watch what happened with COVID. Look at the authoritarianism that COVID ushered in. It's staggering. So you can find me on YouTube. I write an annual review, and every year I swear I'm not going to do it again because it's just so hard. It is somewhere between 150 and 300 pages. You try to write 300 pages at the end of a year. You make Stephen King look like a piker if you can write that fast. And this year I'm going to write about the darkness. Every year I try to find the stuff that people are not writing about. I think some of my best writing was about Ukraine and about NATO's instigation of the war from in 2022. And then I did a sort of an update in 2023. I try to find like Michael Lewis. Michael tries to find the plot within the plot. And I actually think he's stunk lately, but historically, Michael's been phenomenal. And I once wrote an article about Greenspan, and I thought I nailed it. And then I discovered that Lewis had written basically the same theme 17 years earlier. So Year in Review, David Collum Year in Review comes out every December. Usually it's been getting to the point where it's been leaking into January, like part 2 or part 3. And then on Twitter at David B. Collum. There's people, I try to answer emails. They're getting a little crazy.
Yeah.
But if you're smart enough to figure out my email, given A, you know my name, B, I'm at Cornell Chemistry, C, therefore you ought to be able to figure out what my email is. I try to answer emails. Don't bury me with bullshit, but
We won't do that. Anyway, I appreciate you being so.
You will.
I appreciate you being so generous with your time. Thank you so much, Dave.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
I'm gonna hit pause.